Hello, everybody, and welcome to segment 4 of our 4-part series, Universities' History, Purpose, and Politics. Well, by way of quick recap, we had a really good look at the medieval universities, the Catholic Church and founding the universities in the Middle Ages, the curriculum, the liberal arts curriculum that has been with us now for well over 1,000 years. In our second part, we looked at the American universities, more of the Protestant Reformation impact there. Today, we're going to look at part 4, which is surviving in today's university. And when I say surviving in the university, really what I want to stress is, how do you send your kids to universities if you have to send them? How do you send them and have them come away with faith in God, faith in country, and faith and self intact? These are the three things that are primarily under assault. And it all starts with God. We saw how pivotal belief in God was to both the founding of the American and the medieval universities. You can't really have, I would argue, certainly when it comes to morality, certainly when it comes to the humanities, you really can't have a viable humanities program without believing in truth and virtue. And so, in part 4, Surviving Today's Universities, we're going to look at the first part of the segment. The first part of our segment today is going to deal with something that far too few people, parents in particular, pay much attention to: dorms and campus life. So we talk about how, as God was decentered from the universe, values, truth went away in philosophy. The idea that that the primary purpose of an education was to create educated and moral citizens, as the founding fathers said. So we moved away from that, and then the assault on the country. Anybody who's paying attention to what's going on in our schools now, thanks to Common Core, all the way down into high school and middle school and elementary school, what's going on with the history curriculum, how David Coleman at the College Board has rewritten the history standards for AP, effectively changing the way high school kids are learning about American history. No longer is it a fact-based history curriculum, one that lays out what happened in terms of facts, dates, and manageable narration. Now it's politicized, not surprisingly. And then finally, the assault on the individual. For far too long, socialist and quasi-Marxist thinking has been taken way too seriously by our academics. Socialism has been discredited almost everywhere in the world. Socialist ideas have left hundreds of millions of dead in their wake over the last 150 years. And yet, outside of the White House, the only place that really takes socialism seriously in this country is your universities. And that's where the assault on individualism comes, where the attack on the individual in the name of the collective happens. So those are the three things we have to keep in mind. Those are the three dangers to your kids when they attend university. And I want to start with dorms and campus life, because this is something, as I said a moment ago, that far too few parents have a real grasp on. I would argue that the dorms are more politicized than the classrooms. We know that in the classroom, your kids are going to be exposed primarily in the humanities, but even in the sciences these days. They're going to be exposed, when they're exposed to political arguments, they're going to be exclusively progressive, left-wing arguments, that traditional values, traditional beliefs are going to be lampooned and impugned by the Professorial. That is almost across the board. There's no hiding from it. If you think small liberal arts colleges are going to save you, sometimes those are even more politicized than the big university campuses, for reasons we will see in a moment. But the dorms are more politicized than the classrooms. Professors, there is some limit on what professors can say. Students are paying more attention to professorial speech. And of course, the media, reluctantly at first, but now the conservative media is doing a pretty good job reporting on the more outrageous aspects of what professors do. And when we have situations where professors are docking kids' grades or bullying them in the classroom, when that gets out, even the universities are forced to rein in some of those professors. So there is a limit to what can be done and what is being done in the classroom. The Professorial is very liberal. They're going to push that on your kids, but there's only so far they can go. The worst offenders will be reined in if people complain. But the dorms, nobody recognizes this. There's nobody policing the dorms. There is nobody watching over the dorms. The dorms are the province of the school administration, very progressive, even in some ways even more progressive than the faculty. And the people that are put in charge of running the dorms, whether they have degrees now, this is the fancy new thing, kids are actually getting their master's degrees in dorm management. As you might imagine, going to school, getting a master's degree to be able to work as a glorified RA in a dorm, there's very little there that's pedagogy. There's very little there in a dorm MA that has anything to do with anything of substance. I mean, these people are just basically learning the politics of running a dorm. And so it's all theoretical, it's all abstract. And so these are all progressive kids, but they lack the intellectual achievement of the professors who actually have PhDs. And so the people running the dorm are every bit as rabidly progressive, in some cases more so, than the professors dare to be in their classrooms. And there's nobody policing them. So when your kids go to the dorms, They're being segregated. They're being lectured at. They're being hammered with white privilege. We now know at the start of this school year, they're separating kids based on dorms. They're putting the white kids at white retreats, and African-American kids, minority kids will be given separate retreats. At the African-American, the Hispanic, the ethnic, if you can use that word, retreats, they're talking to these kids about how precious their culture is, how they should be proud. They're teaching these kids to see the white power structure everywhere they look and to call it out, to not stand for it. Meanwhile, the Caucasian kids are being bullied with white privilege theory. This idea that they need to apologize, this idea that their culture is aggressive and wicked, that whether or not they themselves have ever uttered or even thought something that could be considered racist, they're racist anyway, even if there's no record or track record or inherent intent in what they do or say. They must learn to live with their innate racism. So again, segregation now is being reintroduced to the universities. It's happening in the dorms. The dorms are also places, besides being highly politicized places where there's very little oversight, there's a tremendous amount of collectivism in the dorm. We mentioned the segregation of the kids based on race, but they're also being segregated for the purposes of politics on the basis of gender. The girls are being told very different things than the boys. With the Obama administration's rewrite of Title IX legislation, really a questionably legal thing, Obama took agreed upon the Title IX legislation that had been approved through a whole host of series. There was some democratic process involved, and he just inserted a whole bunch of things, just rewrote it on his own dime, making it much more strident. So for instance, moms and dads with boys, young men, sending young men to college, thanks to the rewrite of Title IX by President Obama and his minions, it is now legal to treat your sons as guilty until they're proven innocent. If a female student accuses them of harassment, if a teacher does, if they say something that somebody's offended by, now the premise is in the schools, at the universities, that your sons will be considered guilty until they are proven innocent, and the ability of your sons to defend themselves from these kinds of attacks, these accusations on campus, radically diminished under the Obama administration Title IX rewrite. So the collectivism in the dorms, teaching people to think in groups, right? Minorities must band together to fight white people, to fight white values, whatever that means, white racism. Women must team up to fight against the patriarchy. Lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender kids need to form alliances to fight against heteronormativity and heterosexism on campus. It's only the Christian kids, the Caucasian kids, the white kids, the kids of privilege, that so say our professors, that have really no voice, that are being told to shut up, sit down, and take your lumps. So politicization in the dorms, collectivism in the dorms, sexuality in the dorms. We've known for a long time that the dorms have become, now that we no longer will allow, ironic, isn't it? We won't allow dorms anymore for men and for women. We've decided that we're going to change that's sexist. We can't have men, we can't have women living in separate dorms. That's reinforcing the patriarchy. So what we've done is we've not only put women and men in the same dorms. At one point we had women on one floor, men on the next floor, at least, so you had a floor separating them. Now that's considered retrograde. So you have women and men occupying the same floors, and now many schools are piloting programs where if boys and girls want to, they can check a box and they can have opposite sex roommates living in the very same room, sharing the very same dressing spaces with each other. And meanwhile, while we are doing that, we are also then, so we're desegregating the dorms in terms of gender, all these genders thrown together. We are now segregating the dorms on the basis of race, right? Absolutely staggering that the progressives are going to fight one form of desegregation only to reinstate it in another. As one of the things we've maintained from the beginning is all of this diversity, tolerance, multiculturalism on college campuses. It's not about leveling any playing fields. This is not about equality or equity. What this is about is power. Sheer naked power, taking it from those who we perceive have it and reinvesting it at others. It's not about leveling anything. It's about overturning the system, putting the so-called oppressed on the top and allowing them to say whatever they want to do to the majority who is now a minority who must keep its mouth shut. So the sexuality in the dorms, besides the living arrangements now, the dormitories are places where birth control is routinely passed out. Many moms and dads don't realize that your kids are paying fees at many universities when they sign up. You don't necessarily ever see an itemized list of those fees. There are fees for X, Y, and Z. Oftentimes under health fees, you will figure out that your kids are paying tuition in part to provide birth control to all the dorms, very advanced forms of birth control, including the morning after abortion pill. And RAs are dispensing this to your kids free condoms, free birth control. All of this is there and present, plus a very libertine attitude that is encouraging these kids to explore sexuality, even going so far as to encourage kids to experiment with bisexuality and homosexuality in the dorms as a way of breaking down, again, this heteronormativity, this idea that heterosexuality is something normal or acceptable or primary. That has to be done away with. And so they're really quite libertine places. I mean, they always have been places of drinking and carrying on. But now that sexuality has come a long way in terms of providing them relatively consequenceless sex, taking care that birth control is plenteous. You have health officials on campus then who can see to them if they get sick, and really encouraging that. So that's part of the dorm life too. And censorship in dorms. The idea that our dorms are places where kids can't talk. There's all sorts of stories in the news about kids in the dorms getting censored, even their Facebook pages. We're finding now that kids will write something on their personal Facebook page. We had a kid a few months ago who actually wrote something negative about Black Lives Matter on his own private Facebook page that some university official, evidently snooping up on the kids to see what they're writing, found it. It was nothing racist or no inflammatory language, just negative comment about Black Lives Matter. He was initially suspended from school, finally got back in with a warning, but they're going this far now to censor you. If you fight the powers that be, if you fight this retraining, if you speak out in the dorms about the unfairness of segregated retreats for the kids, if you speak out against the libertine environment that is being created in these dorms, you're a problem and they'll silence you. So that's a big problem as well in our dorms, and navigating dorms on college campuses. How do you survive them? How do you survive the college dorms? Well, the first thing I would tell you is, given that they're as bad as I'll give you one more anecdote about the sexuality. I had a kid, one of my classes, who was an RA. He was a ROTC kid, kind of a straight arrow conservative kid, loved his country, and went to the ROTC, going to serve his country further after he graduated, but he needed some extra money. And so by becoming an RA for his floor, becoming the person in charge of his floor of students, he was given extra money, given room and board for free. And so he told a story to us in class. That the very first week of the school year, right before the kids showed up, the main student body showed up every year, the RAs were given a supply of birth control, including the morning after abortion pill. And he was given a supply of those pills that was theoretically supposed to last him all year, paid for by student fees that moms and dads don't know about, but it was supposed to last all year. And he tells the story that his job is to give them out, no questions asked to whoever asked for them, including boys. And so he had tells the story that the first week when the kids were back on campus in September, he had given away that first weekend his entire year's supply of those pills and had to go back to the university for more. What do we mean about a libertine environment for the university? So how do your kids survive? Well, the first thing I would tell you is don't send your kids to the dorms. If you can afford, negotiate with your kids. If you can afford to help maybe subsidize for them an off-campus apartment, maybe if they've got a friend that you trust, they could go roommates. But if you can keep them out of dorm life altogether, you're going to be in a much better situation. And think about it. You're sending your kids to school, oftentimes right out of high school, 18 years old, and for the first time in their life, they are living on their own. But it's not just them living on their own. There are, in many cases, hundreds, if not thousands of other kids their age, all alone in these dorm rooms, with RAs that are going to look the other way about things like sex, they're going to look the other way about things like experimentation, that are going to be completely unconcerned about the kinds of relationships the kids are forming with other relationships. And so there's nothing you can do about this. When you get about 100 18-year-olds living together for the first time unsupervised, things get crazy. I mean, I know a lot of us call to mind Animal House, right, back in the 70s, where it was partying and pizza and beer and that kind of nonsense. Imagine Animal House now with a totally progressive philosophical bent to it. Right? Social justice partying, social justice chaos, let's call it, in the dorms. So keep them out if you can. Try to negotiate with your kids. If you can get them to agree to live off campus, maybe you provide a little support for them. Find a way to get them off campus as much as possible. The kids who get lost on college campuses are the ones whose whole life becomes the dorms. Kids can go to class 3 or 4 times a week. They can hear professors spouting anti-Christian, anti-conservative, anti-traditional values. If they can get off campus and get in the real world, work a few hours here and there, or spend some time off that campus, away from that environment, sleep somewhere else, they're much more likely to retain their faith in God, country, and self if they can do that. The kids who tend to get lost are the ones for whom the campus experience swallows them up. So how do you avoid this? There's no good way to avoid it. The one thing they're not going to do is give you segregated dorms for kids who want to witness to traditional values. They're not going to create Christian dorms, for instance, where the Christian kids can all go and hang out. They would never in a million years do that, although now, as we know, universities are creating all black dorms, right, in order to protect a minority from the evil that spreads from white corruption. All Hispanic dorms. Some universities are moving to all transgender dorms. So again, segregation is now coming back under liberalism, but only for protected groups. So beyond that, beyond the dorms, and that's a big deal. I mean, when you take your kids to campus and you give a campus tour, some student's going to take you on a campus tour, show you around everything, tell you how wonderful the library is, tell them how wonderful the food is. Pull that kid aside and say, look, let me ask you a question. Tell me about the life in the dorms. Or just grab a random kid at campus. If you're sitting down having coffee on campus and there's a couple kids next to you, ask the kids about the dorm life. Ask the kids about the nightlife. They'll open up to you. They will tell you, Mom and Dad, exactly what goes on. And that's how you'll find out what's going on. You're not going to get it necessarily from the official tour guides. They're going to whitewash all of that. But take some time, walk through the dorms, find some kids on campus and ask them. The second big issue we have, of course, besides the dorm life and the campus environment, is the classroom and professorial politics. And this is a big deal. I think people are paying attention to what's going on in the classroom much more so than they're paying attention to what's going on in the quad or what's going on in the dorm rooms. But the classroom and professor politics are pretty bad, and one of the reasons why is because universities tend to be echo chambers. You don't have equal representation of worldview. It is remarkable, it's hypocritical, it's pathetic that for all the superficial talk about diversity that you get from your universities, it's all they talk about, by the way. I mean, you would think if somebody from Mars landed on a typical college quad and walked about for a while, that Martian would really begin to concede that maybe the whole point of universities is this odd notion of diversity, ill-defined, poorly conceived, hypocritically enforced. But again, a stranger coming to the universities from outer space would see all the money, the time, the effort, all the administrators now who are pushing these kinds of social justice agendas, they would see the primary function of a university as social and political, not educational. And that's because you have bias in hiring and retaining professors. You should know that the people who hire professors are other professors. The idea that a university president or a board of regents is recruiting people to apply for jobs and sifting through hundreds of applications from professors and then deciding who to hire, it's not true. The people at the top don't make those decisions. They simply rubber stamp what the faculty has done. So a history department full of history professors, primarily liberals, will get together. They'll vet all the incoming applications. A job in colonial American history is open. And they'll get 150 applications. And immediately, before they do anything else, they're going to separate the sheep from the goats. They're going to look for telltale signs why we can eliminate certain candidates. Anything conservative on your record. Anything Republican on your record. Anything on your record that suggests that you're not completely orthodox in your left-wing extremism, and you're going to get in the goats pile. So even before anybody comes to campus, before anybody's formally talked to, a huge screening takes place. It's not the only thing they look for. They're not only screening for politics, but you better bet if you belong to conservative groups or if you have sponsored Republican clubs in the past on your service part of your portfolio, they're going to find a way to set you to the side. It's what they do. They have such a monopoly on thought in the universities that they're self-selecting. And so out of a pile of 150 professors applying for a job in a typical university department, maybe 8 or 10 will get interviews. There'll be Skype interviews or they'll be interviewed at a major history convention. And those 10 candidates, fully vetted for their politics, come to the convention center, and then they're interviewed by a committee of maybe 2 or 3 faculty members who further probe and prod and ask them questions, sum up their research, sum up their teaching, right? And that's where they get a better sense of who the person is. And believe me when I tell you, The premise of hiring at a university, hiring professors to teach, it's less about academic merit and it's more about how does that person fit with all the rest of us. They are not looking primarily for the best candidates, the most qualified candidates, the best teachers, the best records of scholarship. That's not the first thing they're looking for. How is this person going to fit into our very progressive department? And if they have any suspicion, you're not going to get down to the final 2 or 3. And then finally, when you have 2, maybe 3 candidates, those candidates make campus visits where they give talks on their research, they interact with other faculty members. At that point, the department gets together and decide which of the 3 they're going to offer that to. They go to the dean, they get permission. So this is really a bottom-up process, right? It's not the high-up responsible people in the university who are hiring these professors. It's the people in the departments. Now you know why departments stay liberal, because liberals passing judgment on other liberals, eliminating non-liberals, and when you ask these professors, the honest ones will tell you that. We don't think Republicans, conservatives, Christians are qualified to teach in our departments. They'll just tell you that, the honest ones. That's maybe 2 or 3 out of 10. The dishonest ones, 7, 8 out of 10 will tell you, well, that the Republican candidates, the Christian candidates, the conservative candidates, they just don't have the goods, they're not as committed, they don't have the other, they're not other directed like the progressive candidates are, and they find reasons to weed them out. And so it is hypocritical. On a university campus, the thing that should be valued more than absolutely anything else is diversity of thought. If you don't have diversity of thought on a college campus, look, I get why you might not have diversity of thought in a corporate boardroom, right? You may have all companies like Yahoo and Google and Facebook and Twitter, all liberals all the time. Much of the tech industry, all liberals all the time in the corporate board. Okay, that's fair. And then I suppose there are those stodgy, hidebound mahogany boardrooms where it's conservative businessmen. I get why you might have that because you're protecting a brand, you're protecting a culture. I also get that you pay a price for it. If you have a particularly liberal brand and you push liberal ideas like Starbucks does, you may have people walk away from your product. Same goes for conservative boardrooms. But that's free enterprise. That's free commerce. That's trade. These are universities. These are places where our kids have no choice but to go to be educated in a quote-unquote higher way. And so the idea that you have this huge push for diversity that is really only superficial diversity. It's diversity of skin color, diversity of sexuality, diversity of race and ethnicity and religion. And it's superficial because you're not measuring what these kids are, you're labeling them. And consequently, the one thing you never do is try to have any kind of intellectual or political balance in the classroom. And that's why you get these monoliths. So bias in hiring. And then once you do get hired, even if you do manage to sneak through, and I'll be honest with you, I've snuck through, all right? I've gotten through. Even if you do manage to get through, you still face a major problem in that how do you get tenure? How do you make that next step? Once they evaluate you for 6 or 7 years, they are constantly looking at you to see, okay, it's not so much your publishing and your teaching record. Those are pretty obvious. Have you demonstrated any? In my case, I get to these English departments, and I'm the only one in an entire English department who thinks the way that I do. So I go about my business, I teach my classes. The last thing I'm going to do is publicly announce my politics to a group of liberals who are gunning for me. And what happens is, though, the kids, the students, they're sensitive. The students hear a voice that doesn't think the way the other voices do. And they either like it or they don't, depending upon how they've been trained, but they talk about it. You know, people are constantly saying, well, Dr. Pesta said this today. And that's how the faculty finds out. And good luck, because it's difficult. So you have bias in hiring, bias then in retaining professors. You got to pass so many progressive litmus tests just to make it into that final category. It's no wonder that many of the very few conservatives who go all the way in higher ed, particularly in the humanities, they get tired of doing it. And you can already see what my next point is. Beyond the hiring bias that creates a monolith in universities of progressive politics, you also have what we call social justice pedagogy. And this is infecting education at every level now. This is what Common Core is. It's what's been going on in the universities for 50 years. It's the idea that less important than your kid becoming a good engineer or an architect or a writer or a reader or a historian is that they adopt first and foremost the right attitudes. The social justice, read quasi-Marxist socialist, the social justice progressive agenda. It's less important for kids to be accomplished in their areas of study than it is to be uniform in their approach, their thinking, and their politics. I really do believe this. I've seen it on campus for 25 years now. For many professors, whether they know they're doing it or not, it's enough that kids can become progressives. It's enough that kids vote the way we do in the Professorial. If they do that, we're less worried about their skills, their abilities, their viability on the market. Ideally, we will do both. We'll make them viable, we'll make them educated, but we'll also make them progressive social justice warriors like us. But that's becoming harder and harder because we're preparing kids much less for high school than we used to. We're sending many kids to college who don't belong, forcing them in there. The government's guaranteeing the loans that send them there. Universities are getting all that money from the government, as we mentioned last time, from the federal student loan program. So it behooves the universities to take kids, even kids they know are never going to graduate, because that money comes to the universities, and if the kids default, like many of them do on those loans, the universities don't have to pay them back. So our universities are taking kids that don't belong, have no business being there, and then adjusting down their standards to try to keep those kids, especially if those kids come from disadvantaged or minority households. So it's a vicious circle that keeps repeating itself. And so given that we're having a harder time educating kids at a college level, we've decided at the universities that it's less important to give them what used to be a college education, because we can't get all of them to that hurdle. It's much more important to make sure they all share the same progressive social values. That's where we've gone with this justice. And you see it across everything. We know the humanities, English, history, philosophy, theater, art, all of the sociology, all of these programs, humanities and the soft sciences, places like communications and sociology, anthropology, the social sciences, they are completely 100% owned by progressives. The pedagogy is progressive, the methodology is progressive, the outcomes are progressive, the standards are progressive, and the hurdles that your kids have to jump through are all progressive standards. And kids with bona fide progressive values, they get by just swimmingly, even if they don't do all that well on mastering the coursework. So that's something to keep in mind, too. It's very important. The way that the social justice pedagogy makes sense is propagated and emphasized by progressors who are monolithically liberal. And I'll say this, too, while we're on it. University professors are so sheltered. Many university professors have been in school since they were 5 years old. They started in kindergarten like you and me. They went through the high school. They immediately went to a four-year college, graduated, immediately went to an MA program, graduated, immediately entered a PhD program, graduated, got their jobs teaching in the academy. Many, many professors have never left school. And on that rarefied campus air, oh yes, they may have had part-time jobs, waitressing or hosting or painting houses, but their primary world has been academia. Academia is a world completely unlike the real world. I mean, I make this point all the time. We professors, we don't cut the grass, we don't bring in the food, we don't cook the food, we don't clean the food, we don't clean the boards, we don't vacuum the classrooms, we don't change the light bulbs. We are these little syndicates of elites on a college campus, and all the real serious menial work is done by everybody else. Everybody does it for us. So we teach our couple of classes a week, we retreat to our books and our manuscripts, and all of the rest of the campus life is done by others. That's a little socialist utopia, right? Where you've got your little elite core there running everything, and a bunch of proletarians running around doing everything, doing all the hard labor, the heavy lifting, the cutting, the mowing, the cleaning. And that's the world we know. And so when your kids come to us, we sniff our noses at corporate America. We sniff our noses at free markets. We sniff our noses at pulling yourself up by the bootstraps and American liberty and American exceptionalism. Because on the university campuses, we get to live this life of the progressive mind while everybody else takes care of our wants and needs. So that's the danger of social justice pedagogy, because that bubble, that's another good reason why you get your kids out of the dorms. This bubble of campus life, it's absolutely intoxicating. And kids, if there's not something to puncture that bubble and get them off campus, kids actually come to believe that the real world should be like the college campus. It's the last thing in the world we need. Worldview bias and peer pressure. It's an important component as well. With monolithic liberalism and with this bubble environment, with the hiring bias, you get another problem. Progressives on college campuses don't really ever encounter serious conservatives. They don't really encounter serious conservative thinking. So they're so far to the left anyway, and everybody they know and work with is so far to the left. that even moderately conservative people, even people who are mildly left and not dramatically left, begin to be viewed as right-wingers. I know many Democrats and many liberals on college campuses who are fairly moderate. They may be moderate. There may be doctrinaire liberals when it comes to capitalism, anti-capitalism. I mean, doctrinaire liberals in the sense that they always vote for the most progressive liberal candidates, but they may have reservations about abortion, or they may have reservations about immigration, and they can't voice those because they could be liberal 9 out of 10 times, but that 1 out of 10 times for a typical progressive professor is something they never see on campus. They never see it from their colleagues. So we're defining what right-wing lunatic means way, way, way to the left now because of the monolith and the worldview bias here. We mentioned the rewriting of Title IX. How about the case of Keaton, right? Keaton Walbon, who at the University of Tennessee was given a test by his professor, a quiz. This is earth science. Just like I told you, the universities are not, the hard sciences are not immune to this. In an earth science course, Keaton Walbon was given a quiz by his professor, and he was asked an odd question. Name the female lab instructor in our course. And the professor wrote, if you can't name her, then take a guess at what her name is and, quote, make it a good guess, unquote. Well, Keaton, typical undergraduate, he didn't remember her name, so he wrote in the name Sarah Jackson, right? He just picked a name out of thin air. And it turns out that the professor failed him on the quiz, failed him on the question, gave him a 0, and wrote back that you are guilty of sexual harassment. Because evidently, unbeknownst to me, and certainly unbeknownst to Keaton, one wonders why the professor knew it, Sarah Jackson, one of many Sarah Jacksons, is a nude model and a lingerie model. And so consequently, the professor saw the name Sarah Jackson, assumed the student was referencing this one Sarah Jackson out of hundreds of Sarah Jacksons, and then failed him for sexual harassment. And when the kid, Keaton, wrote to his professor arguing that I don't know who Sarah Jackson is, I picked the name, here's the response he got from his professor. Keaton, I have no way of determining your intention. I can only consider the result. The result is that you gave the name of Sarah Jackson, who is a lingerie and nude model. That result means the Title IX definition of sexual harassment. Thank you, President Obama. It doesn't matter if you're male. Now think about this. A male student wrote something to a male teacher on a quiz. No woman ever saw it. No woman came within 5 feet of that paper. The male student, the male professor. This, said the professor, it doesn't matter what you intended to do. Doesn't matter if you meant 1,000 other Sarah Jacksons. The fact that I can't tell what your intent is means that you are now guilty under Title IX legislation. And so the kid failed the exam, failed the quiz. This is what I'm talking about your kids, particularly your sons, moms and dads. This is the kind of garbage that they're going to get even from their male professors on a college campus. Even in science classes now they're going to get this. And this does beg the question, why in the world can't the student then turn around and sue the professor? Because the professor knew, a male professor knew exactly who Sarah Jackson was, lingerie and nude model. How did he know that? And he now brought that worldview, that woman, into the consciousness of an undergraduate male student, a vulnerable undergraduate student. Doesn't the student have the right now to sue him back, right? But this is the kind of goofy stuff that's taking place on college campuses now. Censorship in the classroom, just like censorship in the dorms. This is something that's almost so obvious as to not need any further commentary from me. But we are censoring kids in classrooms. We're telling kids what they can and can't say. This is Benjamin Sweetwood. 2 years after he graduated from Columbia University, Ivy League, only 2 years later was he able to tell his story. In his Chinese language class, Benjamin Sweetwood was asked to create a sentence in Chinese using the Chinese word for handsome. And so, not being terribly effective in Chinese, Benjamin said, "I am handsome" in Chinese. Another student in the class reported Benjamin for saying that, and he was brought up on all sorts of sexual harassment, gender offense charges. Benjamin had to see the program director, the dean, the gender diversity police came and talked to him. And the remarkable thing about Benjamin's story is that at every level when Benjamin complained about this, he was told by his teacher, he was told by his dean, he was told by his administrator that they may or may not have agreed with this, but they have no choice but to enforce the policy. 2 years after Ben graduated from Columbia University, he felt he could tell his story. This is the kind of stuff that's happening in classrooms all across the country. And so, finally, how do we navigate these classroom politics? What do we do? And I'm going to let that bleed into my second point. And this is the last part of our series. How do you survive college with faith and tact? How do you do it? Here are my bullet points. It's going to be a quick hit, but if you can do these 5 things, or some combination of them, you got a pretty good chance of keeping your kids from falling prey to these liberals. Number 1, stay out of debt. College isn't worth it. Stay out of debt. Unless your kid's going to be a doctor or an architect, there's no reason to take out $100,000 in student loans. There's just none. It's not worth that. We were finding out 20 years ago, a college degree meant you were going to make significantly more money than kids with high school degrees. That's not necessarily the truth anymore, especially if your kids are majoring in the humanities or the soft sciences. The odds that they're going to make that kind of money is slim. It's not worth the debt. And besides, it sends a really bad message. Piling up debt for these degrees, it's unnecessary. Kids can certainly work 20 hours a week. Given how watered down the curriculum has become, I mean, literally, we're taking out the hardest aspects of curriculum and replacing them with soft-minded, addle-pated, do-gooder social justice. We're giving kids the benefit and the doubt more and more and more if their politics are correct, even if their answers aren't. So the idea that you're going to take out a lot of money for this, just don't do it. And by the way, having your kids work 20 hours a week, have them go to a lesser college, have them start at a community college for 2 years. The idea that your kid is going to work 20, 25 hours a week to make some money to help pay for this, to keep them out of debt, is also a double benefit because it's going to keep them off campus for 20 to 25 hours a week, which is absolutely critical to keep them out of the dorms and keep them away from that campus lifestyle. So out of debt, number 1. Unless your kid's going to be he knows what he wants to do. She knows she wants to be a doctor, and so she's going to have to go to medical school. Take a gamble if you want on that, because we know, at least until Obamacare is fully implemented, doctors are still going to command a fairly high salary. But, that ties into my 4th one. Be careful what your major is. I love the humanities. I believe the humanities are important. I believe things like history, philosophy, literature used to be critical for teaching virtue, teaching morality, teaching ethics, making kids well-rounded. But all of that's now been co-opted by one-sided progressive dialectic. It's not really open-minded anymore. It's not really about values either anymore. It's about politics. It's difficult to recommend the humanities now. And given the employment opportunities in the humanities, be careful about that. Choose, if you're going to major in something like history or English or philosophy, get a double major, or major in something that's got a little bit more of a marketable edge to it. But stay out of debt. Also keep in mind that college is absolutely not for everyone and not right away. The best students I have ever had are the ones who've gone away after high school, done something. They've worked for a couple years, they had a baby, they got married, they went to the Marines or the armed forces. Take a few years away, at least 1 year away from school. Don't send your kids to college right after high school. Let them do an internship. Let them work and save some money so that the following year or 2 years down the road, if they want to go, they'll have some money saved up so they don't have to get in debt. An 18-year-old being sent to college for the first time, dumped in the dorm, surrounded by all this progressivism and libertinism, that kid's going to have a hard time surviving. I don't care who that kid is. I don't care how much you've prayed with them. Don't care how much you've taken them to church. Don't care how traditional you homeschooled them. You dump an 18-year-old with 100 of his peers, all who have completely rejected his or her values, who know none of the traditional values, the scriptural basis of education that you gave your kids. These kids will not stand a chance in that environment, especially if they're living in those dorms. So we're in a culture now where to be 21 years old is still a baby. I realize that in your household you didn't do that. You trained your kids to be adults, but let's face it, in modern culture, to be 21 years old is a baby. If your kid starts school at 20 instead of 17, 18, so what? So what? They're probably still going to finish before a lot of kids. More and more kids now in the American public universities, they're requiring 5 and 6 years to do a 4-year degree. It's not a coincidence that under Obamacare, your kids are classified as children until they're 27 years old. Literally, your kids are babies who can't take care of themselves until they're 27. So if your kid graduates at 23 or 24 instead of 22, he's still a child in the eyes of the government. And if he can graduate at 24 instead of 25 or 26 and still have no debt, I mean, that's a win-win, right? And what you're going to find is if you help your kid out of high school, intern, work, make money, if you help him with that, help him succeed that way, a lot of those kids will recognize that they don't need college, or they certainly don't need it right away. Maybe down the road 10 years, they'll want to go back and get a degree to help them to make more money or to do a career change. But a lot of kids, particularly young kids, when they're young, they're healthy, they're much better off doing anything else but college for the first couple years. College is not for everyone. It's totally oversold. It's expensive. Many of the majors our kids are majoring in are not going to productively help them, and they're getting in tremendous debt to do it. Take a few years, save some money, have them live at home with you, make a deal with your kids. You live at home with us for a year, you work and save all your money, we won't take a penny on it, we'll pay your room and board, and you think about college a year or two down the road. Let the kids explore what they want to do. Give them a chance to be kids, give them a chance to work a little bit. One other thing you can do, and this is an important one, it's the general education courses where your kids are most likely to be indoctrinated. Your kids, and I understand the value of the liberal arts. My career is based in them, and I think when they're taught correctly, when they're taught honestly, the great books of Western culture, they broaden minds, they shape hearts and minds. The great books of Western culture reinforce Western values up until very recently. But the problem is your kids almost never get those books taught that way. When your kids read the Bible on a college campus, they can, in religious studies, or even in English, I teach a course on the Bible, 9 times out of 10, what they're getting is the Bible is mythology. This is why the Bible's wrong, this is why the Bible's unfair. Here's a feminist reading of the Bible that points out how terrible it is to women. Here's a Marxist reading of the Bible that shows how oppressive God is as a great empiricist, as a great fascist who rules everything. And so, having said that, if the humanities courses, the gen ed courses that they take, if you could send your kid to a 4-year college and all he had to take was accounting or all he had to take was chemistry, okay, you had a shot at it. But for the first 2 years of your kid's education at almost every university in the country, he's going to be taking predominantly general ed courses that aren't necessarily things that he's interested in, and that's where he's going to be more likely to find a steady diet of progressive talking points. If you can send your kids for the first 2 years to get an associate's degree at a community college, they're going to be much better off. The community colleges are much cheaper. There are no dorms at tech colleges. There are no dorms at community colleges. So your kids will have to live with you or get an apartment, but they won't be able to live in dorms on campus. There's not really any campus life at a community college to get lost in. It's cheaper, and they can get these courses. Now, don't get me wrong. An English course, a history course, philosophy course, art history course at a community college, speech course. They'll be political, but they won't be as political, generally speaking. They won't be as bad. And then you've got the kids off campus, right? They got to come home to you. And you can ask them over the dinner table or before they go off and work their 20-hour-a-week part-time job, so what'd you learn in your sociology class today? Right? You have some impact with the kids. And look, we're at the point now where 2-year associate degrees will always transfer seamlessly to the big state colleges and the schools in the states your kids get the degrees in. There's all these programs where the big state schools have partnered with tech colleges to take them with the 2-year associate degree, funnel them into their system, and then at 2 years later when they graduate, they get a University of Wisconsin degree. They don't get a Fox Valley Technical degree. They get a University of Wisconsin degree or a University of Tennessee degree, right? So it will never appear on the kid's diploma that he attended a 2-year tech college. So if you can save the money, have the kid live at home and work, put some money away that he saved, get his gen ed stuff out of the way, then he'll also be 2 years older. So your 17-year-old graduates from high school, you have him work for a year or two, get him an internship, have him pursue something that he loves for a year or two. He's got 2 years of money in the bank, and then you send him to the 2-year community college to get his associate's degree. He's 21 now. He's got money in the bank for his last 2 years. He's got his general education courses out of the way while living at home with you. Now when you send him to the University of Wisconsin, the University of Tennessee, the University of California, all he has to take, by and large, is his major courses. So all of that aside now, he's got money, he can get his own apartment, you can help him with that, and for 2 years he can study accounting or chemistry or marketing, whatever it is he wants to do, and avoid a lot of the other stuff. So keep your kids out of debt, number one. And when I say debt, let me be very honest with you. Financial debt comes and goes. I hate the thought, and you saw all the charts and graphs in our previous segment about how out of control debt is. I would argue that as bad as the financial debt is for our kids, don't give them this burden of intellectual debt. Don't let them go to a 4-year university, get tens of thousands of dollars in debt, only to come out believing that the free market system is a disaster, it's racist and sexist, that the history of America is nothing more than the history of oppression and tyranny. Don't let this happen to them. The intellectual debt, keep your kids out of debt. Financial debt, but this intellectual debt that's going to dog them. Look, our kids aren't stupid, they're just poorly educated. And many of our kids, I've talked to many of my graduates. I've been teaching for 25 years. And kids will tell me that, when they graduated in 1999, year 2000, they thought they were all big progressives. I'll get emails from kids all the time. 15 years later, 2 kids and a mortgage? Not all, but many of those kids have come to see now how wrong, how misguided what they were told on campus was. Don't saddle your kids with that intellectual debt. I think it's even worse than the financial debt. Also keep in mind that college is not for everybody, and it's not for everybody right away. So I'm not against college. I work in a university. Trust me, a 21-year-old student who's got money in the bank and lived at home for a couple years, that kid appreciates it more. Those adults who come back to college at 22, 25, 30, 35, they're much better students because they're paying for it. These are the kids that come back at 35, and they're not going to take out loans. They can't afford to take out the loans. They'll never pay them back. So the 35-year-old who's saved his money comes back to school because now they've decided they want to do something different, or they feel they're inclined to be different, or they want to enhance their education somehow. They're always the best students. They don't take any of it for granted. They're not entitled like the kids coming right out of high school are. And so it's a win-win across the board. So not until they're ready, and never, ever, ever send your kid to an undergraduate college until they're fairly sure what they want to do. Don't spend all that time and money sending your kid to college so he can traipse around for 3 semesters trying to find himself. It's a kiss of death. And inevitably, when he does find himself, it's going to be because some liberal professor has pushed him a certain way. And then all that he's taken before is going to go away, right? All that courses that he took trying to find himself aimlessly won't count to his new major. And he's got to start all over again or pick a new one. So not for everybody, not all the time. Use the tech and the community colleges. Again, because they're cheaper, they're less politicized. The kids can't get lost on campus culture because there really is no campus culture on those schools. They come home and they live with you, or they live on their own, and they can work. Choose a major with tremendous care and foresight. It's heartbreaking for me to say, but we're at the point now where the prospects for people majoring in certain things are not nearly as good. So if your kid is hell-bent on being a philosophy major, support him 100%, but get him to double major or get him to get a couple of minors. Philosophy with pre-law and political science or something, right? So then a law career or a career in law school might be a possibility with a resume like that, as opposed to just a basic philosophy degree, which makes things harder. Diversify. Do what you love. If what you love is the humanities, I love them. Do what you love, but also make yourself marketable in other ways. We have a crisis in this country. We have far too many people graduating from graduate school with PhDs, and you think the undergraduates have student loan debt. We ought to throw some slides up about what the average PhD has in debt when you're talking about not just undergraduate debt, but now master's degree and PhD level debt. And I guarantee you, if you get a job teaching as a university professor, if you're lucky enough to be one of the few that gets that job, man, that you could be years and years. You're going to be old and gray and retired before you pay back those loans. Choose a major with care and foresight, and never ever send your kids to college until they have at least a plan. Now they're kids. Your kid thinks he's going to go to college and be a graphic designer. Great. If he's committed to that, that's fine. But and don't be surprised if halfway through he changes. But just don't send them until they have a plan, right? Work that plan out with them. And finally, I think we've already hit on this, but I think it's critical. Have them live and work off campus. It's enough if they're there on school days, if they're there 6-7 hours a day, going to classes, going between classes, seeing their professors, doing what they've got to do, fine. But when they're there 24/7, 7 days a week, when they're there Friday nights and Saturday nights and Sunday nights, well, let's face it, Wednesday nights and Thursday nights are now party time. Wednesday night, Thursday night, Friday night, Saturday night, all party time, all bad influence stuff going on there. Keep them off campus. And if they're not being turned into libertines, like I said, by all the debauchery, then they're being turned into social justice warrior clone drones, right? You don't want that either. So live and work off campus. And this is one of those, when I was your age, the snow was this high and I walked barefoot to school stories. But I'm the first person in my family to go to college. And as oftentimes happens, the first person to go to college ends up going the whole way. They fall into it. They become enamored of education. I did. And looking back now, in the 90s and the 80s when I was in school, it wasn't as bad as it is now, but looking back, I could see it. I mean, when I graduated from my undergraduate program, I voted for Bill Clinton. And I don't know why I voted for him, but everybody else was voting for him. And so by the time 1996 rolled around, Clinton's second term, and I was out for a while, I realized that I had no good reason to do it, that Clinton represented everything I stood against, but it took me a while to correct. And all of that came from just being completely immersed in a progressive worldview where progressivism was heralded and everything else was impugned. It took me a while to get back on track. But what saved me, I think, was working. I didn't take out a single student loan, not for my undergraduate degree, not for my master's degree, not for my PhD. And I did that by I was working 40, 50 hours a week off campus. That's excessive maybe, but I did it. There's no reason to get this debt. And what saved me was dealing with real people in real time outside of campus life. I could go to the universities, I could hear the dreamy utopian idylls of my professor, but then I had a boss, if I didn't do something right, was all over me, was gonna dock my pay if I could blow off classes on campus. I could just not go without any consequence, but I couldn't skip work, right? So I hope you've enjoyed our 4-segment look at universities. There's so much more to say, but I really do think that this is a good primer on where they were, what they should have been, what they meant to be, and sadly what they've become, and a quick look at how you can survive on a college campus is how your kids can survive with faith in God, country, and self intact. Thanks for being here.